All right, well, we are in our last week in the Beatitudes, and after this week, we'll transition into our time in Advent as we prepare for Christmas. But as we kind of make our steps here, finishing up the last part of this series, as I mentioned earlier, obviously we had Thanksgiving this past week, and I don't know about you, but our family growing up had a lot of traditions and things about the holidays, and maybe you have things like that as well, maybe different events you engage in, maybe different foods you cook. And so when I think of Thanksgiving in my family growing up, I don't necessarily think of a moment, but I think more of a smell. And in my house, we knew it was Thanksgiving because my dad would cook something that we called hot slaw. Are you guys familiar with what hot slaw is? Or maybe you can guess. It's kind of the idea of hot coleslaw. It is made from cabbage, primarily cabbage, and he would cook this at Thanksgiving time, and a lot of the ingredients to go into it. Obviously, cabbage has this very poignant smell. It had bacon drippings. It has apple cider vinegar, where it really gets that smell that sticks in your nose. And so this is a meal, or I shouldn't say a meal, but a side dish that's always included in our Thanksgiving. Right? My grandma made it growing up. My dad made it. And ever since I had moved away from home and really started my own family, I began to make it. And I always kind of wondered, when I first started, it kind of didn't turn out that well. At least I didn't feel like it did. And I always kind of wondered, right, how do I know I'm getting this right? Because a lot of people will reject this side just because of the smell. In fact, the thing we joke about in our family is the longer it stays in the refrigerator, the better it gets, right? It kind of sits there and kind of permeates. And then once it starts like growing, that's when you throw it away. But when I first made it, it just didn't taste quite right. And I wanted like my boys and my wife and I wanted people to enjoy it, but I wanted them to not like it because they just didn't like it, not because I got it wrong. Does that make sense? Right? I wanted them to not like it because they had the full experience and they just didn't like it, not because their dad doesn't know how to cook this side, right? I wanted to get it right. But I kind of wrestled with this. How do I know I'm getting it right? The smell smells okay, but it seems to taste a little different than what my dad made and what my grandma would make. I wanted to get it right. How do I know I'm getting it right? And this is a question that I think every single one of us as followers of Jesus have wrestled with before. How do I know I'm getting this right? I'm trying to follow Jesus faithfully, but how do I know I'm getting it right? Because sometimes it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't look like I think it should look. It doesn't smell like I think it should smell. It doesn't taste like I think it should taste, right? I'm kind of crossing illustrations there. But for us followers of Jesus, we ask that same question. How do I know I am getting it right? And we can ask ourselves the same question. How do I know I'm getting it right when it comes to raising my kids? How do I know I'm getting it right at work? When it comes to living out my faith, how do I know I'm doing this right? How do I know I'm doing it right in the community? How do I know I'm living out my faith and getting it right in my marriage? Because you see, just like with that kind of that Thanksgiving dish, I want to get it right. If people are going to deny this dish, I want them to deny it in its full glory. And I think the same way we can relate as followers of Jesus, right? If people are going to deny Jesus because of our lives, we want them to deny him, not because we're just getting it wrong. And I think this hits on a base emotion I think every single one of us has felt at some point, and maybe you feel this morning as well. We're fearful to fail as followers of Jesus, right? We want to get this right. And so the question I want us to wrestle with today, and I got some notes for you on the back of your bulletin there, and the question I really want us to wrestle with as we begin to finish up this series is this. How do we know we are getting it right as followers of Jesus? Right? How do we know we're getting it right? How do we know we are doing it right when it comes to living out our faith in our homes, in our marriages, at work, at school, in our community? Well, our text today is going to answer that question for us. And so we're going to be in Matthew chapter 5, looking at verse 14 through 16. I encourage you to open that up, even though I'll have the text on the screen, because it's going to provide some helpful context for us as you open up your Bible and you see what came before this. But Matthew chapter 5, verse 14 through 16 is going to provide the answer to this question that we all have at some point in our life. How do I know I'm getting it right as a follower of Jesus? How do we know? Well, one of the last things Jesus said at the end of the Beatitudes, he still had a lot more to say in the Sermon on the Mount, but we're going to end our conversation here. Jesus makes this statement, Matthew chapter 5, verse 14 through 16. I'm going to read it and then begin to unpack it. He says this, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand. And it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." So how do we know we are getting it right as followers of Jesus? As we begin to unpack this verse, I want to take you guys in another direction first, because Jesus is using a physical illustration to connect to a spiritual truth, a spiritual application. See, a couple weeks ago, I don't even think it was a couple weeks ago, about a week and a half ago, was rifle season here in Nebraska, right? Deer season. Something that I've been enjoying hunting, kind of learning more about. My boys come with me, and we go out to some public land a little bit of ways from here, and we hike about a mile in, and we sit there until it's about dark, and then we begin our trek out of the woods. And you guys have been, I mean, even just in town, but you've been out of town when it's dark out and you can't see a thing. And so as we begin to hike out of our stand and back to the truck, I usually give the boys some flashlights as we're walking back for a couple reasons. Right? One of which is it literally is dark, right? I want to make sure we're staying on the trail, and so I have them illuminate the trail. Right? I also give it to them because sometimes I can sense a little bit of fear or tension as we're walking through the dark woods, and you literally hear coyotes howling around you, and they're like, how close are they getting to us? So there's a little bit of fear there, and having those flashlights comfort them. But then there's also the element that I don't have any free hands, right? I got this wagon of stuff I'm pulling. I have a gun on my shoulder, and so I don't have any free hands. I need them to hold these flashlights. But one of the main reasons I have them hold these lights, as I mentioned, we're on public land, so you have no idea who is out there. And hopefully, I hope someone has enough common sense not to shoot in the dark and not to shoot at something they can't clearly see. But in the event someone thinks we're just a herd of deer moving through the woods late at night, decides to take a shot, my hope is they pause for a second when they see some lights, right? When they see flashlights, right? Deer don't normally run through the woods with flashlights, and they don't normally talk, but who knows who's out on land like that? And so I give these lights to my boys for a variety of reasons. The main reason is I want us to be seen. I want people to see us, right? The light itself bears evidence of life, right? If someone is looking out in the woods and they see this light bobbing up and down, it indicates somebody is out there moving that light. That is not a natural thing to see. The light bears evidence of life. And it also provides a sense of orientation. It lights the way in which we need to go. And so, as we relate this to our text, as Jesus begins this illustration in verse 14, saying, hey, you are a city on a hill. He's using it to make a greater spiritual point. Let's look again at our text. Matthew chapter 5, verse 14 through 16, even though it's just 14 up there right now. He says this, you are the light of the world. Right? Jesus isn't literally saying you are a giant lighthouse that is lighting the world, right? He's using an illustration to make a deeper point. He says, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. What he's saying here is you are called to bear evidence of me. You have new life. If you are a follower of Jesus, if you've placed your faith and trust in Jesus Christ, right, you have a new life in you. You have a light within you. And therefore, your job is to illuminate and to provide direction, just like a city on a hill does. You can see it clearly. You can't hide it. It's obvious. Jesus says, you are the light of the world. Now, as we kind of were wrestling with that question, how do we know we're getting it right as followers of Jesus? Jesus ends the section of the Beatitudes with this statement, but what's important to note, and this is why I wanted you to open up your Bibles, is look at what came before, particularly in verses 3 through 12. We have that list of Beatitudes, those characteristics of followers of Jesus. These are things that followers of Jesus do. And so this is important because when you get to 14, the reality is if you are following those Beatitudes, evidence that you're following the Beatitudes shows up in, actually starting in verse 13 where we were last week, but 14, right? You are the light of the world. If you are following Jesus, if you are living out these Beatitudes, then you are a light. You will impact society like the salt did last week we talked about. And you will reflect the source of light and hope within you. Right? If you are living out the Beatitudes, you will be like a city set on a hill that can't be hidden. Right? We talked about this last week and in the weeks prior. If you are living out these Beatitudes, you are living in a countercultural way, and you will stick out, just like a city on a hill. That is why Jesus starts out this statement, right? For you who are wondering, hey, am I getting it right as a follower of Jesus? Man, are you sticking out like a city on a hill? That's why Jesus starts this, right? He says, you are the light of the world. Again, a physical thing he's stating here that we all understand to make a spiritual application. And what's really neat to note here is when he compares us to light, we're almost being more spoken of as reflectors of a light within us, Jesus. In fact, Jesus compared himself to light in John chapter 8, verse 12. Jesus made these statements. He said this, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And so what Jesus is talking about here when he calls himself the light of the world, right? He's saying, hey, I symbolize truth and righteousness. And therefore, if you are a follower of Jesus, you do the same thing. You have a new life within you, and therefore you will reflect that as light reflects itself and bears evidence of life in the dark. All right, so how do we know we're getting it right as followers of Jesus? And I'm going to kind of show you the train of thought I see Jesus taking the audience here. But here's the first point I want you to fill in. How do you know you're getting it right? Well, you're influencing our world. You are influencing our world. And when I say world, I'm talking about big picture from maybe a national, international perspective, but even in the context of your world, right? The community that surrounds you, the people that you see on a regular basis, you're influencing your world. And why does this matter? See, as followers of Jesus, we're called to bear light in a dark world. Just like last week, we're called to act as a preservative. We're taught to add some flavor. We're taught to enhance and enrich society. Jesus says, if you're faithfully following me, you're going to be influencing the world as well, just like a city on a hill. As we follow Jesus, as we bear his light, we do some things. We stick out. We particularly stick out in our culture when we stand for truth from a theological, moral, and ethical standpoint. As a follower of Jesus in our culture, if you say abortion is wrong, you will stick out. Right? If you say, hey, I believe that God created life in the womb, and to abort that baby is equivalent with murder, that is not a popular saying. That will get you some criticism. But you're called to be light. You're called to speak truth into dark places. When you speak truth regarding gender in our culture, that can get you in trouble in our culture, but we're called to be light, and when we are directly confronted with things like that, we need to speak truth. We need to speak truth regarding even our allegiance, right? We are Americans. We love the United States, but our primary allegiance is to our eternal citizenship. And so when our government might call us to do something countercultural to what Scripture calls us to do, we go with God every time. And we are fortunate to live in a nation that doesn't have those type of conflicts on a regular basis, but there are believers all around the world who have to make some hard choices regarding following Jesus. They stick out like a city on a hill. We're called to influence our world, even when it comes to the vulnerable. Caring for those who can't care for themselves. Caring for those who can never pay back all that you've done for them. That's what it means to be a city on a hill, to shine light, to bear evidence of the life within you, to provide direction. We stand for righteousness, we stand for truth, and as the text kind of points at, right, if you are a city on a hill, you are going to stick out. And so before we kind of move from this point, right, when was the last time you've experienced tension in your life due to your stand for truth? Right, I'm not talking about intentionally causing problems and starting arguments. Right, people can have whatever views they want. But I'm talking about, has it been a while since you have had a conflict in a relationship because you stood for truth? You see, when you live out the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, verse 3 through 12, you are going to put yourself in conflict with the world. Because it calls us to do some things that are very countercultural. So how do you know you're getting right as a follower of Jesus, right? You're influencing the world, right? What does your light look like? I didn't mention it, but I have a couple different lights as we are hiking out of the woods. I have this cool little light that it's a rechargeable. It casts a pretty wide light, but not very far. And I like it because I can stick it on things. It's magnetic. Doesn't work very far, but it's great for right in front of you. And then I got this other light that, it'll burn your retinas out if you look at it, right? It's pretty awesome. What does your light look like, though? What does your light look like, right? If you are a follower of Jesus, you have a light within you. What does your light look like? Are you using it to influence the world around you? Because if you're not, then chances are you're not getting it right as a follower of Jesus. I just thought that was a cool picture. We'll put it up there. Let's go back to our text. We talked about verse 14. Verse 15. Jesus transitions here. He says this, "Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but they put it on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house." I want you to note here, and I got this up on our screen, but note what Jesus is doing here. Again, he's making a physical application, or he's talking about a physical thing to make a deeper spiritual application. Something we all understand to help us understand something deeper spiritually. And I think this is very important, right? I want you guys to notice something really deep. Verse 15 follows verse 14. You guys see that? Really deep. And this is important because I think what Jesus is doing here is he's transitioning from big, right? If you are getting it right as a follower of Jesus, then you are impacting the world, verse 14, but you're also impacting your world. You're impacting your home, right? Your private life looks like your public life. Your public life looks like your private life, right? Jesus is transitioning from a city on a hill, something big, something everyone can see, to something that only your house can see. If you are serving as the light, then your public life will reflect your private life, and your whole house will benefit from you following Jesus. So if you're wondering today, am I getting it right as a follower of Jesus, right? One of the litmus tests is, hey, I'm impacting those around me. I'm impacting the world. But the next point is you're positively impacting your home. We are positively impacting our homes. See, the home is the first place we're called to shine. Right? We're to shine with our spouses, right? Our relationship with Jesus should shape and impact how we relate and partner with our spouses. It impacts how you talk to them, how you love them, It impacts how you relate to your kids. How you respond to them when they frustrate the mess out of you. Our relationship with Jesus will impact our relationship even with our parents if you're still living at home, or even if you're not living at home, how we still show love and respect to our parents. If you are following Jesus well, it's going to impact these personal relationships. And even if you're not married and you're not living at home, it'll impact your relationships with your roommates or your neighbors. Right? I've had roommates before that, man, just drove you crazy. But if you are faithfully following Jesus, then your light will impact that relationship. So, how do we know we're getting right as followers of Jesus? We're impacting the world. Big picture, verse 14. Jesus narrows it down. Verse 15, you're also impacting those personal relationships that you're around, right? I'd say that private element. Let's look at verse 16. So Jesus goes from big to a little bit smaller, and then he kind of wraps all of this up in verse 16, and he says, in the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Right? In the same way, let your life shine before others. Next point. How do you know you're getting it right as a follower of Jesus? Impacting the world, impacting your home, and ultimately you're seeing lives changed for the better. Something I want to bring your attention to, because Jesus does this in the original language. He starts out, verse 16, and he says, in the same way, let your light shine. Autos, the first word there that he uses, it's an important transitional statement. Essentially, he's saying, hey, everything that came before, I made these illustrations, I made these points because I want to bring you to a place to tell you the point of why I said it, right? It's used to point toward the moral of the story. So verse 14, verse 15, he's using illustrations regarding light, cities on hills, houses. He's saying, I told you all that to bring you to this. And he uses this next word, shine. It's an imperative, meaning this is a command. Jesus makes all of these statements, these illustrations, to tell the people listening, I'm calling you to shine. Autos lamsito, if I'm pronouncing that right. Right? Autos, in this manner, lamsito, shine. Right? It sounds like I'm singing or casting some spell on you, right? Lamsito, shine. And so Jesus makes all of these illustrations regarding light, and then verse 13 regarding salt, to say, hey, I'm calling you to shine. Just like a city on a hill reflects its light, just like that lamp on the table in a house reflects its light, I'm calling you to do the same. I'm calling you to shine like a diamond. All right, one person got that. So as we are called to shine, as Jesus calls his followers to shine, I want to give us hopefully some tangible application points here. As we shine bright, like a diamond, as we do that, as we reflect Jesus, right, our works will reflect him. Right? Think of that illustration I had. Actually, let's go back to verse 14. That illustration, right, of a city on a hill, right? It's reflecting what is there. It's reflecting a light. And as we seek to love our neighbors, as we seek to love our spouses and our kids, when they might seem unlovable, these acts of patience, these acts of kindness and love ultimately reflect back to the one who showed the most patience and the most love toward us. Right? As we shine bright, we are reflecting the light within us. We're reflecting Jesus. And what happens as we continue to shine bright is our works drive those to him. Right? Our works drives others to him. Right? Because as we follow the Beatitudes from verse 3 to verse 12, very countercultural, they don't make sense. But as people feel the tangible love of Jesus, they begin to wonder, what's different? I want what that person has. And these acts, these works, this light that we illuminate drive people to him. So as we shine bright like a diamond, Our works reflect Jesus, our works drive others to him, and our works cause others to worship him. Right? As you might step in to someone in a time of need, as you love someone when they are unlovable, right? Maybe you are an answered prayer, right? Maybe, they've been going through a hard time, and them getting that phone call, that letter, that text message, that visit at their house was an answered prayer, and your light helps them to worship him. So again, if you're wondering, am I getting this right as a follower of Jesus? Does your life reflect some of these things we talked about? Are you influencing the world? Does your relationship with Jesus impact your home? Because if you're struggling in these areas, then the reality is you are struggling with your followership of Jesus. So I want to encourage us today to shine bright. Now, kind of going back to that opening illustration with the hot slaw, the cabbage. I should have just brought the leftovers in here and let you guys take a whiff of that or a bite of that. You see, when I first started making this, I was kind of wondering, how do I make it, right? I wanted to get it right. I wanted my family to actually love it for what it is and not hate it because I don't know how to make it. And so what my dad did, he actually had this at our house. He scanned it for me and sent it in. This is my grandmother's handwritten recipe for the meal. For those of y'all who can't read that is cursive. And she wrote it out, and I'm not even sure if you could read it. A lot of it is, they're not even exact measurements. She's like, dump a little bit of this in there to taste. But here she has all the ingredients listed on the side. The only thing I've decided I don't like in it is sugar, right? I like a little kick with it. I don't put the sugar in it. But she has everything in there that you are to put in. And the funny thing, again, is a lot of it is to taste. So how do I know I'm getting it right? Well, this is the recipe, right? Or at least as much as my grandma felt like she needed to write out for my dad years ago. And for us as followers of Jesus, how do we know we're getting it right? Man, if you're really wondering, go back to those Beatitudes in verses 3 through 12 and follow the recipe. Because if you follow the recipe, your life is going to look like salt and it's going to look like light. Let's shine bright. I got 2 questions for us and we'll be done this morning. How does your presence in the lives of those around you drive them to Jesus? Right, think of the idea of light. It bears evidence of life. It illuminates. It provides direction. Right, you're like a mosquito driven to the light. How does your presence in the lives of those around you drive them to Jesus? And question 2, does your light need adjustment? Let's pray. Lord, thank you for just allowing our church to walk through the Beatitudes. And thank you for just the past 2 weeks where we've been able to reflect upon just the tangible application of those Beatitudes. God, I pray that each and every one of us takes a moment this week to reflect upon the light that we illuminate. God, you've called every single one of us who call ourselves followers of you to be a light for you. But if we are honest, we all struggle with that at times. So God, I pray that you help us to be aware of how we are representing you. And Lord, I pray that we can be the light that you've called us to be in our community, in our world, and even in our homes. God, help us in this endeavor. Help us to faithfully follow you and draw others to you. In your name, amen.